day, dude, I feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
You know, one of the big things that I constantly I've been seeing lately, maybe it's my feed in my world, my little nerd world, but one of the things that I see quite a bit is there's this debate on you thought it was just like hitting Twitter or, pitching Twitter, right? And everybody kind of going back and forth, but also too, on the strength side of things, there's some real debates out there, especially we're operating through Instagram and things like that too. And there's this bigger debate about traditional type of strength training and then what people would call functional strength, right? And so I think there's a little bit of confusion here on like what language definitions, what people are actually debating about, what specifically, and then also too, I think there's some mix of truth as always of what really works and what we've seen from that side of the world too. And I think one of the big things I wanted to touch on here, right, too, as well, is that I wanted to explain each side of this kind of argument that people can kind of go down, and then also talk about what both sides and generally they can kind of be missing, and then also to our take on what we found to work with it together. I think one of the big things is I think definitions are always really important, and we need to define what we're talking about. Like when we say functional strength, what does that mean, right? What is functional, right? And I think the thing with that, right, is the term has also been like watered down quite a bit, where a lot of people are just doing things with like these, some bands, or they're doing these like athletic type movements. And there's nothing wrong with doing obviously athletic type movements, but also too in the sense of it can be watered down where we're literally not even building capacity. And also then we got to define, well, what is capacity, right? There's all these little branches we can go down. But I think the confusion first becomes is what is functional strength and what is not functional strength? Just because something looks some sort of what it would be like in the movement, we need to understand what capacity actually is. What type of capacity are we trying to build within that athlete when they're training? And so I would also say, I want to argue on the other side of this too as well, what I've also seen from the traditional strength exercises, a lot of people will quote and point to a lot of studies that have to do with like general public or younger populations, or what they would, again, in these studies, I've talked about this before, we consider these things like elite. If we look at the population that is being, targeted here, or the sample set of population that is being tested, or we're going to do this with, a lot of times, we'll say they're elite athletes, but it's like a high school team or something like that. So I think the thing with this, right, is that there is a large, this is documented across the board, is that there is some large upside. And I think I could even connect with this in my personal experience. There is a large upside in some traditional strength exercises, especially if you weren't doing those things prior, right? If you weren't squatting, hinging, weighted carries, if you weren't doing some of these pushing, pulling, some of these basic exercises, and you were only doing your sport, yes, by far, adding some strength into that mix is going to have some major upside. The only thing is, though, is there is a point of diminishing returns. And also, too, we got to remember that, again, it's said quite a bit that strength is plane specific, but even more accurately, and also too, I would reduce a word from that. I might say that sport is specific, right? Strength is specific. And what I mean by that, sport is specific, obviously, as well, but there's also unique capacities that we need based on the sport, based on also what position you play in. The problem is a lot of times in a lot of these strength debates or things with this, right? Like people are looking at very, again, you have confirmation bias, you have all these other things that you're going to kind of fall into naturally, survivor bias, all these things, right? And we can fall into a lot of these thinking errors that has to do when we're actually analyzing, some of this study. But I do think that it's super interesting that, again, we know inherently that if, like, let's say you're a baseball coach, if the guy comes on the field looking like a bodybuilder, right? Even if his squats are through the roof, even if his deadlifts are through the roof, right? All those things, the guy walks on the field, you go, he's probably not going to be my most athletic guy, and he's probably not going to be our best player, right? Coming on looking like that, right? And so we inherently know that. So there's obviously some truth that is in there, that it's just not just, we should just go and do all the strength work. And then again, like I said, I recently actually came across one of my books where I used to document. I'm sure a lot of you guys did the same thing, where, we used to kind of like document our workouts, right? And track our documents. Nowadays, like there's apps and there's all these other ways that you can track your workouts. But back in the day, right, we were just I had a little notebook. I had that was my workout notebook. I used to write what my workout was going to be, what my weights were, all that stuff, and kind of tracked it over time, manually and by hand. And when I found it just the other day, one of the things I was actually looking through my workouts, and I'm like, man, it's so interesting how a lot of these exercises that you would see here, right? Like, man, there's some really good, compounding exercises that are in here too, again, with some push, some pull, some squats, some hinging, all these things, right? The only problem that I was looking at with quite a bit that I see with this, and I think a lot of, at least a mid to high level strength coach would also would see within my programming, was how sagittal my whole workout was. While it would have been a really good workout and it would have exhausted me, which it did over and over again, it also caused a bunch of dysfunction and also caused my body to adapt to some very extreme asymmetries that I now see, that now from this perspective, that I was working really hard, but I was working really hard in the wrong direction, in my opinion. Knowing what I know now, I would never train in that way. And that's, again, I think it's super important for us to pass along in that same way, is like, hey, in my opinion, when I think we would also agree, if we just say in general, without taking the social dynamics of it, I think every coach would agree, strength coach, field coach, all the things, that functional strength is important. Can we all agree on that statement? Functional strength is important. I think where we may disagree is what is considered functional and what is not considered functional. Like, for example, again, is a squat not functional? Well, yeah, I mean, and obviously there's squat type movements, there's hinge type movements, there's pushes and pulls, and there's all of these type capacities that I need within athletic movements. But I think it's very important that a lot of times when we go through a traditional programming, you could really have, and especially in the Western training systems, especially when you get away from, I think there's some big discrepancies between different sports too as well. Like, again, for example, why would a quarterback and a lineman train the same, right? They have very different needs and demands of their sport. Not only their sport, they both play football, but their position obviously requires things that are very specific towards their position when it comes, I'm not even getting into the technique. I'm not even getting into the skill set. I'm talking specifically of what the capacities that physically their bodies need to be able to do, right? Very different demands. And they're playing the same sport. So if we obviously know, again, when they go in the weight room, that's already starting to get like that. I think a lot of times in other sports, especially in sports where, that strength coach is the same strength coach for 4 other sports, they can lack the awareness of the specificity based on position, because it's almost too much to ask. It's too much to ask to understand every sport and every position and what the capacities are of each one. So again, what you see here is that there intuitively or generally is a lack of specificity that's functional, based specifically on not only the sport, but the position in which that player plays within that sport, and then within the individual, what they lack that is holding them back at that position in that sport, right? Obviously we can just go layers and layers deep here, right? So, I'm actually really big on the functional strength side, but that doesn't mean that we don't squat, we don't hinge, we don't do deadlifts, we don't do all those other things. No, I just think that there's a lot of variations and there's a lot of individual variables that we would take in for how we would do, how we would squat, how we are going to work in their deadlifts. Also too, why are we staying in one plane of motion? Like, why are we isolating or targeting just one, again, some people would say, bilaterally, again, this overall builds the overall capacity of the nervous system. And so now, again, this is why I think we need to mix in these really heavy squats, traditional bilateral. It's like, Yeah, but there's a lot of guys that never squat ever, right? And they also have these really high capacities, right? So we know that, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I think people would maybe disagree that that means that we shouldn't squat that way. It's just like, no, I mean, I would rather, and I think everybody would agree with this. What's the point of strength if I can't express it within my sport? And then everybody would argue, especially on the strength side, a lot of those guys would argue, well, yeah, but when the guy gets stronger, you will see it show up in their sport. It's just maybe not direct, maybe it's indirect. But it's like, yeah, but again, as a coach on the other side, what I would say as well is that, and a lot of high level strength coaches that I work with would say the same thing, is they see when they look into the strength community that a lot of times they have this inherent association that as somebody gets stronger, that their on-field performance is tied to the stronger they are, the more power that they have, that their on-field performance is just going to keep going up. They're intimately connected and they're parallel to one another and they're coupled. And that's just not how it works. There's guys that are obviously much stronger. I mean, I'm a key, person in the same area where I know that how I was training while I had a 450 squat, while I had a 500 pound deadlift, again, at certain points, yeah, 100%. When I first started working out, man, I saw some major upkicks in what was going on performance-wise on the field. And this is why a lot of coaches are like, I've seen it. I've seen guys as they get stronger, their on-field performance goes up, their power goes up. Well, you know what I've also seen? I've also seen guys squat numbers and all those numbers, again, me being one of those guys, but I've seen plenty, hundreds, right? Past there that again, and I see this constantly all the time where some of these guys get really strong and their performance actually goes backwards. The athlete is stronger, but their power numbers on the field are lower. And then people go, well, that's probably how they're doing the programming. Maybe it's because they're going for absolute strength and they need to do more power work and da-da-da. No. You're not understanding what I'm saying. You got to understand in very skilled sports, specifically when you get into like baseball, for example, this isn't like sprinting, right? This is the shapes that I'm able to create, the ability to put my body in very unique shapes. It's like some people would argue, and again, they look at all these studies and they're going like, well, yeah, but everybody does things differently. And because they do them differently, they don't have to create the same shapes. So technique really isn't as important. I would argue the opposite way, especially inside very skilled sports, like when you get into, baseball or even martial arts and some of these other things. While there is, multiple ways of doing something, there is only so many ways that you can do it. And there also is a demand of the sport of what you need to be able to do and the shapes you need to be able to create and cover. And if you can't create those shapes and cover those parts of the zone, you don't get to go just like, well, I'm just going to do this, because no, you have an active opponent. This isn't a closed skill. Like, let's say we look at like sprinting or something like that, right? You're not reacting off of somebody that's trying to expose holes in your technique or things that you're not very good at doing. Where in our sport, like again, and also a lot of other sports, they're trying to figure out what you're not good at. Like, let's say if you're doing basketball, right? If you can only dribble to your right and you're not very good at going towards your left, well, they're going to try to expose that. Well, in our sport, baseball, softball, things like that too as well. If you have holes in certain parts of your swing where, again, they're going to pump certain parts of the zone, if you can't create those shapes, it doesn't matter how strong you are, you're going to have issues with spacing and direction and staying on pitches and high strikeouts and all these other things that are going to come into your gameplay. So it's not just purely, how much stronger can I get? And I'll let the skill coach take care of his other things, because what we're losing here is, again, if I'm gaining strength and I'm gaining power, but I'm losing shapes and options, that becomes very problematic for on-field success. Right? Doesn't that seem pretty straightforward? And so what I mean by that is, if I'm a strength coach and I'm purely looking from this lens of just saying, I'm just going to overall increase, bigger, faster, stronger. And that means on the field, they're going to be bigger, faster, stronger. And that's my limited view of understanding what actually leads to results within this sport, within the demand specifically of what they need to be able to do, not only just defensively or pitching or et cetera, but, because some athletes, obviously younger, again, there are going to be some more two ways that are pitching and hitting and things like that as well. There's going to be different demands, again, if they are a pitcher or if they are a two-way athlete that needs to be able to do multiple things, and also to play defense. And then also, I see this quite a bit, there's a lot of athletes that build up a very high capacity defensively and what they need to be able to do from that side of things. But when they step into the box and actually hit, there's some limitations from that side. And so I think that's one thing I kind of wanted to start opening up that conversation more, is that And I think we need to expand on this even more as we continue to go. And I want to dive into some of these individual things as we go forward. And I want to talk about this a little bit more in kind of different pieces so that we can give it the detail that I think it demands when we talk about things specific and specificity here. Is that I think we need to define functional a little bit more accurately and understand what we're actually talking about here. And then we also need to give the respect to capacities and a lot of the work that has been done on the strength side of how important it is to, yes, have higher capacities, overall strength and overall power output, and understand how all of that kind of meshes together and creates actually athletic performance. So I want to break that down over the next, couple weeks and kind of get into some of these things in more detail. But really wanted to open it up with that thought exercise of just understanding what might be holding us back and what people are saying when they mean some of these things.